Chapter 1. The day fire was ordered to kneel. No one remembered a time when fire had been silent. In the highlands of ancient Persia, flame was not merely kept, it was listened to. It burned in stone temples, open to the sky, fed with care, tended with restraint, and approached only after the mind had been steadied. Fire was Atar, the visible edge of truth. It did not roar, it did not comfort, it endured, and in that endurance, it judged. On the day fire was ordered to kneel, the sky was flawless. King Ardashir stood beneath a white canopy, stretched across the ceremonial court of Pasargadae. The marble tiles reflected light so cleanly that the world appeared newly made. Priests lined the approach to the fire altar, their robes uncreased, their eyes lowered, not in submission, but in caution. They had performed this ritual 1,000 times, offerings, invocations, the measured silence between breaths. Never had the king attended so closely. Never had soldiers ringed the court. The fire burned at the altar's center, upright and narrow. Its color neither red nor gold, but something purer, as if hue itself had been refined away. It gave warmth without excess. It cast shadows that behaved themselves. Ardashir raised his hand. The priests froze. "This kingdom bleeds," the king said. His voice carried without effort. "For generations, we have allowed men to interpret the flame. They argue over meaning while borders burn." A murmur rippled, quickly swallowed by discipline. "Today," Ardashir continued, "the flame will no longer wander. It will serve order." The high firekeeper, old Merdad, lifted his eyes. "Fire serves truth, majesty. Order follows." Ardashir looked at him not unkindly. "Truth that cannot be commanded fractures a kingdom at a signal." Attendants brought forward the bindings, bands of polished bronze, etched with sacred script, cooled in spring water, carried with gloved hands. They were not chains, they were laws made solid. Merdad's breath caught. "You cannot, I can," Ardashir said, "and I will." The bindings were placed around the stone basin, not touching the flame, but defining it. A circle of permission, a geometry of obedience. The priests began the counterchant instinctively, words older than the city itself, but Ardashir silenced them with a glance. "Enough," he said. "Fire has listened long enough." For the first time in memory, the flame reacted. It did not flare, it did not dim. It hesitated a pause, so slight it would have been missed by anyone not trained to watch for meaning in stillness. Then, slowly, impossibly, the flame lowered itself, shortening by a breath, then another. The court exhaled as one. Order had worked. The bindings sealed. The circle closed. The flame burned on, smaller, steadier, contained. Soldiers relaxed. Scribes began to write. The ritual ended without omen, and the kingdom entered its most peaceful era. Years passed like measured steps. Borders stabilized. Rebellions failed before they began. Harvests came on time. Fires in homes burned evenly, predictably. Even grief seemed moderated, as if loss itself had learned restraint. Only the temples noticed what did not return. The flame no longer answered questions. It burned, but it did not speak, not in flicker, not in heat, not in shadow. The priests adapted. They taught new interpretations. Silence, they said, was approval. Merdad, aged 10 years in 3E, when he died, the fire did not change. Generations followed. Kings ruled wisely, then less so. The bindings were never removed. They became tradition, then symbol, then certainty. Children were taught that fire had always been this way, obedient, limited, safe, until the day it burned, where no altar stood. The first unbound flame appeared in a potter's yard at dusk, a thin line of blue-white light licking the air without fuel. It gave no warmth, it cast no shadow, it simply waited. They stamped it out. It returned the next night. Word reached the temple by morning. A young acolyte named Kaveh was sent to investigate, not because he was wise, but because he listened well and did not speak unless necessary. He found the yard empty. The potter had fled. In the center of the packed earth, when Kaveh approached, it did not shrink. It leaned. Kaveh stopped breathing. In that instant, he understood something the bindings had hidden. Fire did not resent restraint. It remembered it. A pressure formed behind his eyes, not pain, but accounting. He saw no visions. He felt duration. The long, quiet years of obedience. The patience of something that outlasts kings. You were not meant to command. The flame did not say. It did not need to. Kaveh fell to his knees, not in worship, but in recognition. When he looked up again, the flame was gone. In its place lay a faint mark on the earth, circular and exact, a boundary. Back at the temple, the bound flame burned as it always had, but for the first time, it was no longer alone. Chapter 2: The Flame That Walked Without Fuel. Kaveh did not speak of what he had seen, not at first. In the days following the unbound flame's appearance, the Temple of Fire returned to its rhythms: dawn tending, midday recitation, evening sealing. The bound flame burned as it always had contained within bronze law, measured by inherited hand gestures, fed with wood prepared weeks in advance. To any observer, nothing had changed, but Kaveh noticed what discipline concealed. The flame no longer leaned toward offerings. It accepted fuel, but without appetite. It burned because it was required to burn. That distinction mattered. Kaveh was young enough to remember when the elders still debated interpretations, when a flicker to the left meant caution and a sudden rise meant warning. Those meanings had faded into rote phrases long before his initiation. Yet the movements themselves had once carried intention. Now, the flame performed them like a recited othakrit, empty. At night, when the acolytes slept, Kaveh lay awake, listening to silence. Fire made no sound, but silence did. On the seventh night after the potter's yard, a runner arrived at the temple gates, breathless and pale. He carried no seal, no official mark, only fear. "There is another," he said. The high attendant frowned. "Another what?" "Another fire," the runner whispered. "On the northern road, it walks." The word walks spread uneasily among the priests. Fire moved, yes, through grass, through roofs, through careless villages, but it did not walk. Walking implied intention, direction. Kaveh volunteered before his fear could decide otherwise. They gave him no escort. The priests did not want soldiers near something they did not yet understand, and perhaps unspoken. They remembered that the first unbound flame had not harmed him. The northern road cut through low hills and dry scrub, a place where wind shaped the land more than water ever had. Kaveh followed the runner's directions until dusk thinned the sky. That was when he saw it. The flame stood on the path itself. No basin, no altar, no fuel. It was taller than the first knee-high, steady, its color shifting between white and deep blue like heat seen through crystal. It moved forward by increments so small they were almost imagined, then stopped, as if waiting to be noticed. Kaveh stepped onto the road. The flame advanced, not toward him, but alongside him. They walked together in silence. Villagers watched from a distance. frozen in place. Some knelt, some fled. No one screamed. Instinct held them still, the way animals pause when the earth itself seems alert. Kaveh felt no heat, but he felt weight pressure behind the sternum, the sense of standing near something that carried memory deeper than language. The flame's presence bent thought, pulling his attention not forward, but backward. He understood then this was not a messenger, it was a remainder. "You are not Atar," Kaveh said softly, unsure why the words came. "You are what was left when Atar was bound." The flame did not answer. It did not need to. They reached a place where the road split, one path leading toward the capital, the other into the mountains where old temples lay abandoned, their fires extinguished generations ago when worship had been centralized, controlled, refined. The flame stopped. For the first time, it flared not upward but outward, widening briefly, illuminating the stone markers at the fork. One path glowed faintly, the other did not. Kaveh understood the choice being offered. "You want me to lead you," he said. The flame shrank slightly. Agreement, perhaps, or permission. Kaveh hesitated. To go to the capital was to invite scrutiny, doctrine, binding. To go into the mountains was to step beyond record, beyond protection, beyond certainty. He turned toward the mountains. The flame followed. By the time dawn broke, rumors were already racing ahead of them, of fires that ignored rain, of flames that cast shadows in the wrong direction, of warmth that carried sorrow instead of comfort. The priests dismissed them publicly. The court did not. King Ardashir's grandson, now ruling in a city grown heavy with peace, received the reports with narrowed eyes. He ordered investigations, then quiet removals. Fire, after all, belonged to the state. But what unsettled him was not rebellion, it was inconsistency. In the temple records, Kava's name began to appear, too often attached to anomalies, to unexplained calm, to places where fear had dissolved instead of spread. The scribes wrote carefully, but patterns do not need emphasis to be seen. Up in the mountains, Kaveh found the ruins he had only read about. Stone rings blackened by ancient flame, altars cracked by frost, inscriptions worn down until only intention remained. The flame moved from site to site, settling briefly in each, as if remembering itself. At the third ruin, something changed. The flame touched the stone. The rock did not crack. It did not blacken. It warmed. Kaveh felt it, then clearly, unmistakably. The presence was growing, not in size, but in coherence. The fragments of something long constrained were finding alignment. This was not a return. It was a reassembly. Far below, in the capital, the bound flame flickered for the first time in generations. Just once. Just enough to be noticed. Chapter 3, The Gate That Refused to Close. They reached the crater at dusk. From a distance, it appeared as the desert often did at sunset, flat, coppered, deceptively calm. Only when Kaveh crested the last rise did the ground fall away. Opening into the vast wound, the elders called the sealed place, and the people called the gate, where fire never sleeps. The Darvaza crater burned, as it had for decades. Flames licked the inner walls continuously, fed by gas that the earth exhaled without pause. It was a fire engineered by mistake, justified afterward as necessity, and sanctified only by endurance. The state had learned to live with it. The priests had learned to reinterpret it. But the flame walking beside Kaveh stopped at the rim. For the first time since the mountains, it recoiled, not in fear, but in rejection. Its color dimmed slightly, as if encountering something familiar, yet wrong. "This fire is not yours," Kavi said quietly. Below them, the crater roared loud, hungry, wasteful. This was fire without memory, without intention. It consumed because it could not do otherwise. The walking flame circled the rim once, then split. Not violently, not dramatically. It separated into 3 smaller tongues, each moving with deliberate slowness. One hovered near Kaveh, one drifted toward the crater's edge. The third remained still, watching both. Kaveh's breath tightened. Fire was never meant to divide. Binding had taught it to behave as one. Seeing it choose multiplicity unsettled something fundamental. The flame nearest the rim leaned downward. The gas fire surged upward in response, flaring brighter, louder, as if challenged. For a moment, brief, impossible, the 2 fires faced one another. Then the walking flame withdrew. Kaveh understood at once. This gate could not be healed. Not yet. It was too loud with forgetting, too full of a fire that burned without listening. The third flame watchered, closer to Kaveh's chest. He felt the familiar pressure, deeper now, threading through bone and breath alike. A knowing settled into him, unwelcome but precise. This place will be last. Before he could step back, a sound carried across the desert, the low thunder of hooves and wheels. Torches appeared on the horizon. The state had found him. Soldiers ringed the crater at a distance, careful not to approach the rim. Their armor reflected firelight in fractured pieces. At their center rode an emissary in court blue, his expression fixed into something practiced and brittle. Kaveh of the temple, the emissary called by order of the crown. "You are to return with us." Kaveh did not move. The flame at his side brightened not hot, but dense, like a thought sharpening. "You have carried unauthorized fire," the emissary continued. "You have entered restricted ruins. You have caused instability in the sacred flame of the capital. These acts require explanation." The soldiers shifted uneasily. Some stared openly at the walking fire. Others refused to look at it at all. "This fire was never authorized," Kaveh replied. "It was only postponed." Murmurs rippled through the line. The emissary raised a hand. "You misunderstand your position. Fire belongs to the state, so it cannot belong to chaos." The flame by the rim pulsed once, slowly, and then the crater answered, not with explosion, not with collapse, with silence. For 3 heartbeats, the roaring gate below dimmed. The gas fire lowered, not extinguished, but restrained its voice, cut short, as if something vast had placed a hand over its mouth. Every torch along the rim flickered. The soldiers froze. Kaveh felt the mountain memory again, sharper than before. The knowledge that fire, when unbound, did not obey power, it corrected imbalance. The silence ended. The crater resumed its roar, but the message had been delivered. "This gate stays open because no one remembers why it was sealed," Kaveh said. "Not because it must burn forever." The emissary's face had gone pale. Doctrine offered him no answer for what he had witnessed. "Stand down," he ordered finally, voice tight. All of you, Kaveh, turned away before permission could be withdrawn. The flames gathered again into one, falling into step beside him as he walked back into the dark. Behind them, the gate burned on, but something fundamental had shifted. For the first time since its creation, the fire at Darvasa had been made to listen, and far away, in the capital, scribes crossed out old classifications and opened a new ledger, one with no title yet, only a single line written in cautious ink. uncontained fire, active. Chapter 4: The crown that would not burn. By the time they reached the lower plateau, the fire had changed again. It no longer strained against Ardashir's grip, nor did it lie dormant like a sleeping animal. It burned with discipline, narrow, deliberate, as if it had accepted the terms of its captivity without forgiveness. The chains of bronze script glowed faintly, not hot enough to sear, but bright enough to remind him they were awake. Firebound was never extinguished. It merely waited. Below them, the land of Persia unfolded in measured lines, irrigated fields drawn like careful calligraphy along the riverbanks. Mud brick villages clustered around wells, watchtowers standing at intervals like punctuation marks in stone. This was not the wild world of the Zagros passes. This was order. And order, Ardashir knew, was where fire most desired to test itself. They entered the outskirts of Istakhr at dusk. Word had already preceded them. Smoke always carried stories faster than men. By the time Ardashir crossed the outer gate, people were gathered along the street, silent, not cheering, not bowing, simply watching. Their eyes were fixed not on his face, but on the glow at his side, the unnatural flame that cast no sparks and yet seemed to sharpen every shadow it touched. "The king returns with a second son," someone murmured. "No," another replied. With a leash, at the heart of the city rose the fire hall, its dome tiled in deep lapis blue, inscribed with prayers older than any dynasty. This was where kings were crowned and unmade, where fire was not weapon or omen, but witness. Ardashir felt the flame stir as they approached, the first tremor of resistance since the binding. It recognized this place. Memory ran deep in sanctified stone. High Priest Varum waited at the steps. He was older than rumor claimed, his beard white, but his eyes sharp, reflective, like polished obsidian. He did not bow when he saw the flame. He bowed to Ardashir and then, fractionally, to the chains. "You have done what no king has dared," Varum said, "or what no fire has allowed." "I did not conquer it," Ardashir replied. "I constrained it." Fire does not distinguish. Inside, the fire hall breathed warmth and incense. Sacred flames burned in open braziers, fed by ritual and care, their heat steady, comforting. As Ardashir passed among them, something unprecedented occurred. The sacred fires bent, not visibly, not dramatically, but enough that every priest felt it, a subtle tilt of attention, like heads turning in unison. The bound fire answered them. For a moment, the hall filled with overlapping presences, old, disciplined flames, and the ancient, remembering fire pulled from the mountain's depths. The air thickened. Ardashir's vision narrowed. He tasted metal and ash. Varum raised his staff sharply. "Enough." The priests drew the curtains of the inner sanctum, severing the resonance. The sacred fires straightened. Breath returned to the hall. Silence followed, heavy and unkind. "You cannot bring that into the coronation," Varum said at last. "The crown is sworn before fire, not against it." Ardashir met his gaze. "The crown has been sworn before fire for generations, and still the borders burn, the people fracture, and kings fall to their own excess. Perhaps the oath is incomplete." Varum studied him for a long time. Then he nodded once. "Then we will test it." The crown of Persia was iron gold, unadorned, its surface etched with the names of kings who had worn it before. Some names were crossed out. Others had been worn thin by time and repetition. It was placed upon a stone plinth at the center of the hall, beneath an opening in the dome, where starlight fell like judgment. The priests brought forward the trial flame. This fire was neither wild nor bound. It was the flame of continuity, used to test rulers since before written law. A king would kneel, place the crown upon his head, and pass through the flame. If his rule would bring ruin, the fire would scar. If balance, it would pass without harm. No one claimed it was infallible, but no one ignored its verdict. Ardashir knelt. The crown was heavy when set upon his brow, not in weight, but in memory. Names pressed down on him: ambition, compromise, cruelty disguised as necessity. The bound fire tightened its glow at his side, as if bracing. "Proceed," Varam said. The flame rose. It licked across the crown, down toward Ardashir's temples. Testing, tasting, heat brushed his skin. The hall held its breath. Then the bound fire reacted, not violently, not defiantly. It leaned. The chains flared, inscriptions blazing white. The bound flame extended a thin, controlled arc that intersected the trial fire just for an instant. The two touched. What followed was not an explosion, but a correction. The trial fire recoiled, not extinguished, but altered, its shape narrowing, its roar softening into a steady hum. It passed over Ardashir without leaving a mark. The crown did not glow. It did not blacken. It endured. Gasps rippled through the hall. Varam lowered his staff slowly. His voice, when it came, was quiet. "The crown has accepted restraint." Ardashir rose to his feet. The fire at his side dimmed, satisfied for now. That night, as the city celebrated cautiously, Ardashir stood alone on the palace terrace. Below him, Persia slept beneath watchful stars. He felt the bound fire's presence, like a second spine along his own, neither ally nor enemy, but consequence. A king who bound fire could rule by fear or by limit. The flame did not advise. Fire never did. It only waited to see what would be done with what had been chained. Chapter 5. The law written in flame. The first decree of Ardashir's reign was not spoken aloud. It was burned. At dawn, before the city fully stirred, a brazier was placed in the hall of records. Scribes gathered with tablets of clay and rolls of parchment, expecting proclamations of tax, tribute, or war. Instead, Ardashir entered alone, carrying the bound fire himself. The chains no longer glowed constantly. They answered only to intention, now brightening when meaning sharpened. He set the flame at the center of the hall. It did not flare, it waited. "Bring me the oldest law," Ardashir said. The scribes hesitated, then retrieved a cracked tablet, its edges repaired many times over. It contained a statute older than the empire itself, one that allowed governors to seize grain in times of unrest. A measure meant for survival, long abused for control. Ardashir held the tablet over the fire. The flame did not consume it immediately. It traced the incised lines, glowing along the grooves of the words themselves. Where the law had been used to protect the fire passed gently. Where it had been twisted, the clay darkened, then split. When Ardashir withdrew the tablet, half of it remained intact. "This law stands," he said, "only where it has not betrayed its purpose." Murmurs rippled through the hall. No king had ever allowed fire to judge law. Law judged fire, fire enforced law. This inversion unsettled everyone who understood power. Word spread quickly. Within days, petitions arrived not for mercy, but for burning. A village elder asked that a boundary ruling be tested, the one that had cost them their wells. A caravan master demanded the fireway, a trade levy that had grown heavier with every governor who inherited it. Even a noble house, secure enough to risk precedent, brought forward a charter granting them exemption from service. Each time, the process was the same. The law was placed near the flame, not into it, into it. Fire was witness, not executioner. Where intent aligned with necessity, the flame remained narrow and calm. Where corruption had layered itself over purpose, heat gathered and cracks appeared. Not all laws survived. Not all petitioners were pleased. By the end of the week, resentment thickened beneath the city's order. Control had been predictable before. Abuse was understood. Now, uncertainty ruled, and uncertainty frightened those who thrived on leverage. That night, High Priest Varam confronted the king. "You are turning fire into a judge," he said, "and judges into subjects." Ardashir did not look away from the flame as he answered, "I am turning fire into a limit. Judges forget limits, and when the fire remembers something, you would rather it did not," Varam asked. The bound flame stirred faintly. Ardashir felt it not as threat, but as reminder. Then he said, "I will be judged with the rest." Varam studied him for a long moment. "Fire has unmade kings for less. Fire unmade kings who claim to own it," Ardashir replied. "I claim only to restrain myself." Beyond the palace walls, another consequence took shape. In the border provinces, rumors hardened into fear. Governors who ruled by intimidation sensed their charters weakening. Soldiers whispered that fire no longer obeyed rank. In one fortress, a captain refused to light the signal pyres without written confirmation that the law still protected him. Fire, once an unquestioned instrument, had become reflective. And reflection is dangerous to those who rely on shadow. That same night, Ardashir dreamed not of the mountain, but of a plain of glass. Upon it stood countless flames, each contained within a narrow circle. Some burned steady, others strained against their bounds, distorting the air. And at the center stood one circle, cracked but unbroken. When he awoke, the bound fire was dimmer than before, not weakened, measured. Ardashir understood then. Binding fire did not grant control. It demanded consistency. Every law tested, every decision weighed, every exception justified not to men, but to memory itself. The price of restraint was vigilance, and the fire was patient enough to collect it. Chapter 6. The Rebellion of Cold Ash. The first uprising did not announce itself with banners or steel. It arrived as silence. In the eastern satrapy, where the desert thinned into steppe, and the cities clung to irrigation like memory clings to pain, the fire temples went dark, one by one. Not extinguished never, extinguished, but muted. Flames burned low, pale, obedient in shape, yet empty of presence, like eyes that see but do not judge. Reports reached the capital slowly, carried by riders who spoke in careful tones. "The fires still burn," they said, "but they no longer answer." Ardashir listened without interruption. He did not summon generals. He did not consult astrologers. He went instead to the Hall of Records and stood before the bound fire. "It has begun," he said. The flame did not move. It did not need to. Cold ash. The priests called it when they finally dared name the phenomenon. Fire that obeyed ritual but refused memory. Flame stripped of witness. To the common people, it felt like betrayal. To governors, it felt like opportunity. In the eastern cities, new decrees were issued quietly, efficiently. Laws previously scarred by the flame were restored temporarily. Grain was requisitioned again. Labor levies returned under old justifications. The people obeyed, not because they believed, but because the fire did not object. When villagers protested at a shrine outside Nisa, the priest lit the altar and spread his hands. The flame warmed, it illuminated, it judged nothing. "This is how it has always been," the governor said. But the people remembered otherwise. The first act of open defiance came from a woman with no title. Her name was Atissa, daughter of a kill worker. When soldiers came to seize her family's stored grain under a revived statute, she carried the decree to the shrine herself. Before witnesses, she placed it beside the fire. Nothing happened. The governor smiled. Atissa stepped forward and scattered ash from the altar onto the tablet. The clay hissed not with heat, but with fracture. The tablet split cleanly down the center. The fire guttered. By nightfall, the shrine was sealed. By morning, Atissa was gone. The rebellion spread not through fire, but through its absence. In market squares, people began lighting small lamps, not to pray, but to test. They held grievances near the flame and watched for response. Where there was none, anger sharpened. Where the flame leaned or brightened, even faintly, crowds hushed. Fire had taught them expectation. Its silence taught them mistrust. When news reached Artashir, the court demanded force. "Send legions," the generals urged. "Restore order before doubt becomes doctrine." "The fire has already chosen," the priests warned. "It has withdrawn. To pursue is to defy it." Artashir said nothing until night. Then he ordered his horse saddled. He did not bring the bound fire, he brought only chains. The journey east stripped away ceremony. Without the presence of the fire, Artashir felt the empire's true shape, even strained, held together by habit more than belief. In villages, people watched him pass with faces neither welcoming nor hostile, but measuring. At Nisa, he found the great fire temple sealed, its doors marked with ash symbols layered over old blessings. Inside, the altar flame burned, small and thin. "Why does it not answer?" Artashir asked the gathered priests. "Because you taught it restraint," one replied bitterly. "And restraint teaches withdrawal." Artashir approached the altar alone. He did not command, he did not bind, he knelt. "I did not teach you to disappear," he said quietly. "I taught you to refuse corruption." The flame wavered. Outside the temple, the crowd grew. Atissa's name passed in whispers, not as martyr, but as measure. What had the fire done for her? What had the king? Artashir rose and turned to the doors. "Bring the governor," he said. The man arrived flanked by guards, confident in his legality. His decrees bore seals unbroken by flame. "These laws stand," the governor said. "The fire does not object." Artashir held up the chains. "Then neither will I," he said. "Stand with me." Confusion rippled. Before protest could form, Artashir wrapped the chains around his own forearms and pressed them to the altar. The flames surged not hot, but bright beyond endurance. The chains glowed white. The air fractured with pressure. Artashir did not cry out. The fire leaned not toward the law, not toward the governor, but into the act itself. When Artashir withdrew his arms, the chains were marked with new line scars, not of heat, but of decision. "Fire may withdraw," Artashir said, voice steady, despite the tremor in his hands. "But responsibility does not." He turned to the governor. "Read your law aloud." The governor obeyed, words faltering. As he spoke, the flame shifted subtly, precisely. Where the law justified survival, the fire remained calm. Where it masked exploitation, the flame bent away, thinning to nothing. The crowd saw it. The governor saw it. Cold ash fell from the altar, not extinguishing the flame, but outlining its refusal. The law was revoked before sunset. Atossa did not return. No one knew where she had gone, but her absence no longer felt like erasure. It felt like pressure applied elsewhere. That night, the fires in the eastern satrapy brightened not fully, not obediently, but attentively. Ardashir slept little. He understood now the rebellion was not against him, nor against fire. It was against abdication. Binding fire had taught the empire restraint. Now it demanded participation, and that, Ardashir knew, would cost more than chains. Chapter 7: The Crown of Unburned Gold. The crown had never been meant to survive fire. It was older than Ardashir's dynasty, older even than the city's oldest stone, forged of gold, alloyed with trace metals whose names were forgotten. It had been passed from ruler to ruler, not as a symbol of wisdom, but of continuity. Each king wore it briefly at ascension, then sealed it away. Tradition held that gold remembered nothing, that it reflected power without absorbing it. That belief no longer held. When Ardashir returned to the capital, the crown was waiting in the Hall of Measures, placed upon a basalt plinth ringed with ash. The priests had not dared move it, but the fire had noticed it. The bound flame leaned faintly whenever the crown was near, not in hostility, but in assessment. Ardashir stood before it, alone. "Does it bind me?" he asked the flame. "Or do I bind it?" The fire gave no answer. It never did. Two questions, framed as tests. He lifted the crown. It was lighter than expected. Gold often was. But there was resistance, not physical, but temporal, as if the metal resisted being brought fully into the present. Names pressed against Ardashir's thoughts, rulers who had expanded borders, rulers who had traded justice for calm, rulers who had burned cities to preserve order and called it necessity. The crown had never been burned. That, Ardashir realized, was its flaw. He carried it to the fire. Priests gathered at a distance, fear held in check by ritual training. No king had ever brought the crown this close. The bound fire brightened slightly, not flaring, but sharpening. Ardashir lowered the crown until its rim hovered above the flame. Nothing happened. Relief passed through the Haldan confusion. The fire did not judge gold, after all. It did not remember power. Ardashir held the crown steady. "Then remember me," he said. He pressed the crown into the flame. The fire did not melt it. Instead, the gold darkened along its inner edge, not blackening but dulling, as if luster itself were being stripped away. Fine lines appeared, fractures so thin they could be mistaken for ornament. The air thickened. The flame leaned inward, not consuming but inscribing. Ardashir felt it then, not pain but narrowing. The fire was reducing the crown, forcing it to mean less, not more. When he withdrew it, the crown remained whole, but its shine was broken by a single band of unburned, golden-touched, unmarked, running across the brow, where a king's thoughts pressed hardest limit. The priests approached, cautious. "It is damaged," one said. "No," Ardashir replied. "It is defined." Word spread quickly. The crown no longer gleamed. In sunlight, it caught unevenly, forcing the eye to adjust. Nobles disliked it at once. It refused to dazzle. At the next council, Ardashir wore it openly. Debate stalled. Men accustomed to speaking boldly found themselves measuring their words. The crown did not compel silence. It exposed excess. When voices rose in ambition or threat, the dull band along the brow seemed to widen, catching the eye, drawing attention not to the king, but to the imbalance before him. "Take it off," one lord whispered afterward. "It unsettles the room." "That is its purpose," Ardashir said. But not all were unsettled in the same way. Among the military, the crown was seen as weakness. Generals, who had tolerated restraint in law, now bristled at restraint in symbol. Fire-judging statutes was one thing. Fire-marking kingship was another. That night, a blade was drawn in the palace. The attempt was clumsy, born more of fear than planning. A junior officer struck in a corridor between lamps. His dagger aimed not at Ardashir's heart, but at the crown itself. The blade shattered on contact, not burned, broken. The officer fell to his knees, stunned more by the failure than by guards who seized him moments later. When questioned, he spoke plainly. "If the crown cannot be destroyed, the king cannot be replaced." Ardashir ordered his release. "Tell your commanders this," he said. "The crown does not protect me, it limits me. And any king who breaks that limit will find it offers no shelter." The officer left shaking. That night, the bound fire dimmed, then steadied. It had not demanded this act, it had accepted it. Ardashir understood then. Binding fire had not placed him above judgment. It had placed judgment where everyone could see it. The crown was no longer a promise of permanence. It was a reminder of fragility. And fragility, when acknowledged, reshapes power more thoroughly than fear ever could. Chapter 8. The Trial of Living Fire. The summons came without seal or signature. At dawn, as the city's fires were lit in careful sequence, from hearth to shrine to tower, the bound flame in the palace shifted its posture. It did not brighten, it straightened. The air around it tightened, like fabric drawn across a frame. Ardashir felt it at once. "This is not judgment," he said softly. "This is demand." By midday, word had spread through the capital that the fire would speak not through omen, not through priest, but through trial. No precedent existed for such a thing. Fire had always been consulted, never confronted. Yet, the expectation settled over the city with unnerving calm, as if everyone had been waiting for permission to stop pretending distance still existed. The trial of living fire was declared at sunset, not by decree, but by silence. In the square of measures, where weights were tested and contracts sworn, a ring of stone was cleared. No banners were raised. No guards stood within arm's reach. At the center, a shallow basin was set and adorned, undecorated, its simplicity almost defiant. When Ardashir entered the square, he wore no crown. The unburned gold rested behind him, locked away. This was not a trial of kingship. It was a trial of conduct. The crowd parted without instruction. Priests stood among merchants, soldiers beside farmers. No one knelt, no one shouted. Fire did not tolerate theater. Ardashir carried the bound flame alone. He placed it within the basin. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the fire changed. It did not rise. It spread, not outward, but inward, layering upon itself, growing dense. Light sharpened until edges of shadow cut like blades. Heat remained distant. This was not a fire of warmth or destruction. This was a fire of distinction. A voice moved through the square, not sound, but structure. Every person felt it assemble inside them, shaped from shared understanding. Bring forward what you ask me to witness. The first to step forward was a merchant from the river districts. He carried a contract authorizing exclusive control of ferry crossings, granted decades earlier under emergency rule. He laid it beside the basin. The fire leaned, the ink lines glowed faintly, then faded. The document remained whole, but its authority thinned, like paper left too long in sun. This law protected trade. The voice pressed until trade became leverage. The merchant bowed, shaken but unharmed. The contract was returned to him, valid in part, void in excess. Next came a soldier, armor worn thin by years of border patrol. He presented an order that had sent his unit into a winter pass with insufficient supply. Half had not returned. The fire did not lean, it narrowed. The order blackened at the edges, not burning, but erasing names, those who had signed without walking the route, who had counted lives as distance. The soldier stood rigid, jaw clenched, as memory passed judgment no court ever had. More followed. A widow with a land claim denied by delay. A scribe whose oath had been bent by pressure. A priest who confessed to softening fire's silence into convenient interpretation. Each time, the fire responded differently. Sometimes it clarified, sometimes it refused. Once, it went entirely still, its most severe response when a noble attempted to test it with flattery disguised as gratitude. Then the fire turned. Now it pressed. Bring forward the king. The square held its breath. Ardashir stepped closer to the basin. He did not kneel. He did not stand apart. He placed his hands on the stone rim, feeling the fire's weight without heat. "What do you ask me to witness?" he said. The fire tightened until light itself seemed compressed. The cost of restraint. Images unfolded not as visions imposed, but as recollections unlocked. A village spared by revoked decree, later lost to flood because no authority remained to compel reinforcement. A border left unmanned while laws were debated, allowing a raid that might have been deterred. A priest dismissed for corruption, replaced too slowly, leaving a shrine leaderless when famine struck. Restraint had saved many. It had also delayed some until saving became impossible. Ardashir absorbed each memory without flinching. He had known these outcomes in abstraction. Fire delivered them without mercy or accusation, only fact. You bind what must not rule. The fire pressed, but you hesitate where command is required. Ardashir closed his eyes. "When I command," he said, "I risk becoming what I restrained." The fire did not dispute this. "And when you hesitate," it replied, "you permit other fires to rise." The basin cracked, not from force, but from pressure of meaning too tightly held. Ardashir straightened. "Then teach me the limit," he said. The fire shifted, not toward him, but around him. The crowd felt Itan enclosing attention, precise and exhaustive. Command without hunger, it pressed. Restrain without absence. Act where delay multiplies harm. The fire drew a narrow circle of light on the stone at Ardashir's feet. It did not trap him, it defined a threshold. Step beyond this only when you accept memory. Ardashir stepped forward. The circle did not move. The fire dimmed, then steadied, its posture easing. The trial was complete. No cheer rose, no proclamation followed. People dispersed slowly, quietly, carrying something heavier than certainty. Calibration. That night, fires across the city burned evenly, not brighter, not dimmer, but aligned. Priests found their rituals required fewer words. Soldiers found orders shorter, clearer. Merchants discovered loopholes, closing without confrontation. Ardashir returned to the palace alone. He did not retrieve the crown. He stood before the bound fire once more. "I will fail," he said. The fire leaned faintly. "Yes, and when I do, then remember what burned without warmth," the fire replied, "and decide again." Artisher nodded. Beyond the walls, a wind rose from the plain, not hot, not cold, but carrying the smell of distant storms. The empire slept, not at peace, but in balance. For now. Chapter INE, the border, where fire hesitates. The border city of Karax had never trusted the capital's flames. Perched where stone gave way to dust and the empire thinned into contested land, Karax survived, not by law, but by alertness. Its watchtowers were older than its walls. Its people counted seasons by raids repelled rather than harvests gathered. Fire here was practical signal pyres, cooking hearths, forge heat for weapons. Memory mattered less than speed, which was why the fire's hesitation was noticed immediately. On the third night, after the trial of living fire, the eastern signal tower failed to answer. The flame burned, but it did not leap. Its light stayed narrow, inward, as if unwilling to announce itself across distance. Captain Marin saw it first. He had commanded the border watch for 12 years, long enough to recognize fear masquerading as discipline. He climbed the tower himself, boots ringing against stone worn smooth by generations of centuries. The fire was there, alive, upright, silent. "It should answer," one of the younger guards muttered. "It is answering," Marin said, "just not us." Scouts returned before dawn with news that confirmed what the fire had already implied. Riders massed beyond the salt-flat snow, banners raised, no challenge issued, a probing force, waiting to see if Karax would hesitate first. Marin sent a runner to the city council. He did not send for priests. By noon, debate filled the council hall. "We must light the great pyre," one elder insisted. "The capital will see. Reinforcements will come, and if they do not," another countered, "if the fire judges this escalation unnecessary." "Fire does not bleed," a third snapped. "We do." Marin stood apart, listening. He had knelt before the bound flame once, years earlier, when it had still been legend. He remembered the sensation, not warmth, but pressure, expectation. That pressure was absent now. The fire at Karax was not refusing out of fear, it was weighing consequence. By sunset, the riders beyond the flats drew closer. Marin made his decision without council approval. He ordered the gates opened, not wide, just enough. A small detachment rode out, not to attack, not to parley, but to stand. No challenge issued, no flame raised, only presence, measured and deliberate. From the tower, the fire flickered once, not brighter, aligned. The opposing riders halted. They had expected signal, confusion, escalation. What they found instead was restraint, without absence, exactly what the fire had named to Artisher days earlier. Still, restraint alone did not end conflict. An arrow flew, not loosed in rage, but testing distance. It struck a shield. Marin raised his hand. "Hold," he ordered. Another arrow followed, then another. The riders advanced in loose formation, probing again. The fire tightened. This time, Marin felt it not as command, but as permission. "Advance," he said. The detachment moved, not charging, not retreating, but closing space with discipline sharpened by clarity. When blades met, it was brief, decisive, enough to demonstrate cost without inviting annihilation. The riders withdrew before full engagement. At the tower, the signal fire lifted at last, not flaring, not calling the empire to war, but marking the moment restraint ended and defense began. A controlled signal, a boundary declared. Messengers rode through the night. By the time news reached Artashur, the crisis had already passed. He read the report twice, then stood before the bound fire. This was not ordered, he said. The fire did not deny it, and yet it was correct, because command arrived when hesitation ended. The fire pressed, not before. Artashur closed his eyes. He understood now the danger of what he had set in motion. Fire that hesitated required humans who could decide. Not every border had a merit. Not every city would choose balance over panic or pride. The empire was learning. Learning, he knew, was uneven, painful, sometimes fatal. That night, Artashur issued a decreet, written in law, but in instruction. Border commanders were granted conditional authority to act decisively when delay multiplied harm, and to answer afterward, not to punishment, but to fire's accounting. Some protested, others felt relief. Fire was no longer the shield behind which cowardice could hide, nor was it a banner behind which ambition could charge unchecked. At Carrick's Captain Marin stood watch as dawn broke over quiet flats. The fire burned steadily now, neither eager nor withdrawn. One of the guards asked, "Will they return?" Marin nodded, "Probably." And next time, Marin looked to the flame. It leaned faintly not. "Next time," he said, "we'll know when to move." Far away, in the capital, Artashur set the unburned crown back upon his brow. The band of dulled gold felt heavier than before, not because of fire, because of trust. Chapter 10. The fire that chooses a successor. The rumor reached the capital before the messenger did. It moved through the city in careful whispers, changing shape with every retelling. The fire had leaned toward a child. The flame had refused a priest. A shrine had burned brighter without being fed. By the time the official report arrived, the court was already tense, as if the future had taken a seat among them uninvited. Artashur listened in silence. "Where?" he asked. "In the southern valleys," the messenger replied, "at the shrine of the low wind." That shrine was insignificant by design. No relics, no royal patronage. It existed to serve farmers whose fields depended on seasonal gusts more than rain. Fire there was humble, practical, unadorned, which made the report dangerous. Artashur went without ceremony, no crown, no retinue large enough to distort the moment. Only 2 guards and a scribe who knew how to remain invisible. The valley lay quiet when they arrived. Fields lay fallow between plantings. The shrine's flame burned low, its light barely reaching the stone rim. Yet the air around it felt weighted, attentive. A child stood near the basin, not a priest's apprentice, not noble-born. A girl of perhaps 12, hair bound back with twine, hands stained with soil. She was not touching the flame. She was listening to it. Artashur felt the shift the moment he stepped within the shrine's boundary. The fire leaned, not toward him, toward her. The girl looked up, eyes steady. No fear, no awe. Only recognition, like someone noticing a pattern finally explained. "You're early," she said. "For what?" Artashur asked. She shrugged, for deciding. The priest approached nervously. "Majesty, she came at dawn." "The fire I know," Artashur said gently. He turned back to the girl. "What did it say to you?" "That it is tired of being asked the wrong questions," she replied, "and that you are too careful." A murmur rippled through the guards. Artashur raised a hand. "And what did you answer?" "That careful is better than hungry," she said. "But careful still has to choose." The fire brightened, not hot, not dramatic, but unmistakably approving. Artisher knelt. This, he realized, was the true test. Not whether fire could judge kings, but whether kings could accept being unnecessary to the future. "You are not my successor," he said carefully. The girl frowned. "I know." Relief flickered through the shrine. "But," Artisher continued, "the fire is showing you something. It's showing me everyone asks it to clean their mess," she said. "No one asks it when to stop." The fire leaned harder now, pressure tightening like a held breath. Artisher felt the truth settle. Binding fire had taught restraint. Teaching restraint had created space, and in that space, fire was no longer bound to lineage or law. It was choosing continuity of judgment, not a ruler, a witness. "What is your name?" Artisher asked. "Samira." He stood and addressed the priest. "She will be trained." The priest paled. "As what?" "As someone who knows when not to ask fire to decide for her." The fire steadied. Artisher turned back to Samira. "This path will make people fear you." She considered this. "They already fear fire. I'll just remind them why." On the return journey, the capital felt altered, not threatened, not weakened, but discentered. Power was no longer converging. It was distributing itself along lines of attention. That night, the bound fire in the palace dimmed, not extinguished. Relieved, Artisher removed the crown and set it beside the flame. "For how long?" he asked. The fire did not answer in years or names. "Until choosing no longer requires you." Artisher slept deeply for the first time since binding the fire. Beyond the city, in the low-wined valley, Samira stood beneath the stars, hands still smelling of earth, listening. The fire whispered nothing. It did not need to. Chapter 11. When fire walks without chains, the first sign was not flame, but movement. In the weeks following Samira's naming, fires across the empire began to behave as if distance no longer constrained them. Not physically, no. Flame leaped from shrine to shrine, but attentively. A hearth in the north would dim when a fire in the south leaned. A signal tower would refuse to rise, just as a temple flame steadied hundreds of miles away. Priests spoke of coincidence. Soldiers spoke of timing. Traders spoke of luck turning strange. Artisher spoke of none of it. He felt the change most clearly at night, when the bound fire in the palace no longer pressed against its chains. It remained contained, but the tension had eased, like a bow unstrung without being broken. "Fire is learning to walk," he said quietly to the empty hall, "not in body, in choice." Reports arrived from the provinces. In one city, a shrine fire had extinguished itself for a full hour, an act unheard of, only to relight when a corrupt magistrate resigned of his own accord. In another, a forged flame had burned blue for a single afternoon, forcing smiths to halt work, just as a border skirmish resolved without bloodshed. Fire was no longer reacting, it was coordinating. The priests were terrified. "This was never the pact, High Priest," Varum said, his voice tight. Fire was bound to judgment, not agency. Artisher met his gaze evenly. Fire was bound to restraint. Agency is what emerges when restraint is understood. "You are letting it slip its leash." "No," Artisher replied. "I am letting it leave my hand." That night, the palace was breached. Not by an army, not by rebellion, but by access. 3 gates opened simultaneously, east-west, and inner court each by different hands, none of whom could later explain why they had acted. Guards did not resist. They stepped aside, as if making room for something that had already arrived. Ardashir rose from his chamber before the alarm sounded. He knew, in the hall of measures, the bound fire had lifted itself from its basin. It did not rise high, it did not spread, it hovered, upright and narrow, its chains still present but slack, tracing its outline without holding it. Samira stood before it. She had arrived without escort, without announcement. Dust marked her hymn. Her face was calm, but her eyes held strain, not fear, but responsibility pressing inward. "It's time," she said. "For what?" Ardashir asked, though he already felt the answer. "For fire to stop pretending it belongs to places," Samira replied. "And for you to stop pretending it belongs to you." The fire leaned between them, choosing, but acknowledging, alignment. Outside the hall, footsteps gathered, priests, guards, courtiers. No one crossed the threshold. The air itself felt marked. "If it leaves," Vorum said, "from the edge of the chamber, what remains of the empire?" Ardashir looked not at the fire, but at Samira. "What remains," Samira said, "is what people do when fire is no longer watching every word." Silence followed, not empty, but evaluative. Ardashir stepped forward and removed the chains. They did not fall. They loosened, sliding from the flame as if they had never been fixed points at all. The fire did not surge. It did not escape. It simply stood, uncontained by force, for the first time since binding. Nothing burned, nothing collapsed. The empire did not end. Instead, something subtler happened. The fire divided, not splitting, but echoing its posture, mirrored in every flame across the land. Not copies, not fragments, but resonances. Each fire now held the whole, not as command, but as context. Fire walked, not as ruler, as memory in motion. Ardashir felt his knees, weakened not from loss, but from release. The weight he had carried shifted, redistributing into countless hands, countless choices. Samira exhaled shakily. "It won't speak like it used to," she said. "People will have to listen differently." Ardashir nodded. They always should have. At dawn, the palace fires burned normally. No miracles, no proclamations. Yet across the empire, decisions were made more slowly and owned more fully. Without fire's constant gaze, hesitation became visible. So did courage. Ardashir did not reclaim the chains. He ordered them placed in the Hall of Records, unsealed, unguarded. A reminder that power bound too tightly forgets how to move. And power unbound without memory forgets why it must. Fire remembered both, and now it walked without asking permission. Chapter 12. The covenant that burns forward morning came without omen. No column of fire marked the horizon. No prophet cried from the gates. The sun rose, as it always had, pale gold over stone and dust, as if history itself were determined to behave normally after everything had changed. That, Ardashir realized, was the true sign. Fire had learned restraint, not because it was chained, but because it remembered what followed excess. The empire did not awaken to command, it awakened to consequence. In the days that followed the unbinding, messengers reported confusion, not chaos, but uncertainty. Judges hesitated longer before sentencing. Generals delayed orders, sensing the weight of decisions that no longer carried divine confirmation. Shrines burned steadily, offering no answers beyond warmth and light. Some called it abandonment, others called it freedom. Ardashir convened the final council of his reign in the open court, beneath the sky rather than beneath flame. The bound fire's basin stood empty behind them, clean and silent. Fire has not left us, High Priest Varum said carefully, but it no longer explains us. Ardashir inclined his head. Then we must explain ourselves. Samira stood among the council, not as priestess, not as ruler, but as witness. Her role had changed as radically as fire's. She no longer interpreted flame. She listened to people, to doubt, to the quiet friction of choice that was harder. In the western provinces, a city extinguished its own sacred flame voluntarily for a single night, mourning a famine caused by human neglect rather than divine will. In the east, a warlord attempted to relight an ancient altar by force. The fire refused to rise beyond embers until his men dispersed. No punishment followed, only refusal. Fire no longer ruled by fear, it responded to alignment. Ardashir understood then what the binding had truly been, not control of fire, but control of responsibility. By chaining flame, he had given people certainty at the cost of maturity. Now, certainty was gone, and with it, excuse. On the 40th day after the unbinding, Ardashir announced his abdication. There was no ceremony of flame, no divine sign. He spoke plainly, standing before the people, without crown or chain. I bound fire, so we would survive, he said. I release rule, so we may grow. He did not name a successor. Instead, he named a process councils chosen by region, judgments recorded publicly, flames kept in common spaces rather than halls of power. Fire would witness, not decide. Some protested, most listened. Samira met him one final time at the old mountain shrine where the binding had first been conceived. The chains lay coiled nearby, weathered now, already losing meaning. Do you regret it? She asked. Ardashir considered the question honestly. I regret that it took fire to teach us what listening meant, he said. But I do not regret letting it go. The shrine fire burned softly, unremarkable, yet complete. Samira smiled, not with triumph, but with resolve. Fire remembers you kindly, she said. Ardashir shook his head. Fire remembers choices. That is enough. As he descended the mountain for the last time, he felt lighter, not absolved, but finished. The king who bound fire had become the man who trusted people. Across Persia, flames continued to burn. In homes, in forges, in temples, no longer sealed. They warned, they did not command. And so the covenant endured not, written in law or chain, but carried forward in every moment where a human being chose wisely without needing fire to watch. The empire did not collapse. It learned, and fire, unbound yet unforgettable, walked beside humanity, not as master, not as servant, but as memory made light. END. Closing segment. The last flame fire still burns in Persia, not chained, not enthroned, not feared. It burns in the hearth where bread is shared, in the forge where steel is shaped, in the quiet lamps lit for the dead and the unborn. The king who once bound fire is remembered not for his chains, but for the moment he loosened his grip and allowed humanity to stand without divine restraint. Fire did not fade when it was freed, it endured, because fire, like memory, does not need a master, only a witness. And so the flame passes forward, not as a command from the heavens, but as a question carried by every generation. What will you do now that the fire no longer decides for you? The answer is no longer written in flame. It is written in choice.